It seems like Christianity is like the ultimate spiritual convenience given the world we find ourselves in. I mean, does that trouble you at all?
Alex O'Connor recently did a video with Cliffe and Stuart Knechtle, who, if you don't know by name, you probably would know if you saw them. They're always on college campuses talking to students about Jesus. And we're going to look at one of the questions that he asked that I just love the question, and I think it pops up a lot. So we're going to jump in. But if this is your first time seeing my channel or my face, I just try to have conversations about Christianity, the Bible, faith, and reason, and just try to encourage believers to be growing in their faith. So if you like this kind of content, click follow, subscribe. Would love to have you joining along with us. But let's go ahead and check out this video clip.
How suspicious are you of something like Christianity insofar as it does seem to answer something like existential dread? In the way that you say, look, if you don't believe in God, then it ends at death. And when you suffer, your suffering is meaningless. Whereas if you become a Christian, it fills you with meaning, it fills you with purpose, it sort of brings you sort of self-assurance that life is still worth living. And I think to myself, okay, like, is the problem of evil a response to Christianity, or is Christianity a response to the problem of evil? Are there a bunch of people suffering, unsure of their existence? They don't know why they're here. They don't know why they suffer. They don't know why good people suffer and bad people don't. And so here's a story we can tell ourselves which will help us overcome that. And there are two theses here. One is that that's because it's true, and this is how the world is supposed to be. And one is that, well, it's because of all of the suffering and the meaninglessness that people have created this story of Christianity to overcome it. I mean, I'm always, my suspicion of a position almost exactly correlates with how convenient it is, either spiritually, politically. And in this case, it seems like Christianity is like the ultimate spiritual convenience given the world we find ourselves in. I mean, does that trouble you at all? You see what I'm saying? Like, it's so convenient. It's so brilliant at overcoming the most fundamental, deepest existential problems of humanity that it sort of garners some suspicion. Well, look, we live in a world and suffering is real. Yes, I agree. And like, as an atheist, you're going to look at that and you're going to go, this is all meaningless. Yes, I agree. And Christianity allows you to say it's not. Yes, I agree. But, you know, like, so would a great many beliefs that I could probably invent. They wouldn't be as comprehensive or impressive as the Christian worldview, for sure. But the very fact that it serves that purpose makes me suspicious as to its, its psychological origin. You know what I mean?
So I just love this question, and I really do appreciate how respectful Alex O'Connor is in giving a question like this. He's stabbing a little bit, obviously not like maliciously, but he's poking at Christian faith a little bit, but he's doing it so respectfully. And I actually love watching his videos. But really what this boils down to is the question is this just wish fulfillment? You know, it would be really, really nice if we had purpose and meaning. And so is Christianity just filling that desire that we have for purpose and meaning, even if it might not actually be true? And the one thing I want to point out is that he says,
my suspicion of a position almost exactly correlates with how convenient it is.
So in other words, if it's really, really convenient, then he might be really, really skeptical of it. And to this, almost immediately when I heard this, a quote by C.S. Lewis came to mind. And he says I believe it's in Mere Christianity, he says, the Christian says, creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exist. A baby feels hunger. Well, there is such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim. Well, there is such a thing as water. Men feel sexual desire. Well, there is such a thing as sex. And that came to mind immediately because I'm like, well, yeah, man, food is a really, really convenient answer to hunger. And so we should eat, it doesn't mean we should explain food away. And I understand that there's still like the question of, did this event, did the resurrection actually happen? Is Christianity actually true? And that is the question that we should be asking. But when it comes to convenience, well, just because something's convenient doesn't mean it isn't true, right? And if something is convenient and it's the perfect answer to something, well, maybe it's the perfect answer and maybe it's convenient because it's the perfect answer. It's really going to solve the problem. And if it really solves the problem, just like hunger really solves, or excuse me, just like food really solves the problem of hunger, maybe we shouldn't write it off. Maybe we should pay attention to it. But then he also says,
so would a great many beliefs that I could probably invent. They wouldn't be as comprehensive or impressive as the Christian worldview, for sure. But the very fact that it serves that purpose makes me suspicious as to its its psychological origin. You know
You
what I mean?
bet.
And I actually think that's another good point, is that we could come up with all kinds of things like Christianity, or like, the story of a God, loving us and having purpose for our lives that would help, kind of help this existential dread that we have. But if we were making it up, would we really add in the part where there's this being, this transcendent being who is also a judge over us? Wouldn't we rather just have a being who, yes, he loves us, and then that's it. And we can still do whatever we want to do in life, and we can still fulfill all of our kind of desires without having to think about how those things are going to be judged by an eternal transcendent being. And I would say another C.S. Lewis quote comes to mind. He says, I didn't go to religion to make me happy. I always knew a bottle of port would do that. If you want a religion to make you feel really comfortable, I certainly don't recommend Christianity. And I think that's a really great quote too. And it kind of gets at this idea that I'm sure at some level, the idea of God, and a God who loves us, and even with Christ, a God who suffers with us, that does bring comfort on one level. But on another other level, you also have, the picture of a God who judges, and that's even part, in some ways, of what makes some people uncomfortable with the idea of God. He's a God who judges. But we don't get one without the other in Christianity. And so to think that Christians are somehow just kind of naively grabbing onto this idea of a loving God who brings purpose to our life to help us avoid the existential dread of life without God, I don't know, because at the same time, what goes hand in hand with that is a God who holds us accountable to the way that we live, and a God who judges us for our actions, for the way that we treat other people, and even for the way that we worship him, whether rightly or wrongly. And so you don't get one without the other. If we just wanted wish fulfillment, if we just wanted something to ease our existential dread, I don't think Christianity would be the thing that we would come up with. And finally, this leads to ultimately where I believe the historicity of Christianity comes into play. We didn't just make up the figure of Christ. And now you can argue whether or not we made up the resurrection, whether we made up the idea that Christ was God made flesh who died for our sins and rose again from the dead and then ascended to heaven. But that is where the Gospels come into play. And that's where the historicity of the Gospels comes into play. And that's why we have so much scholarship on whether or not these are reliable historical documents. And, I believe, and obviously a lot of Christians believe, that the answer points to yes. And that's where I love the work of people like Wes Huff and Richard Bauckham and N.T. Wright, and, these people who go at lengths to talk about the historicity of the gospel messages, and are these eyewitness accounts or not? And that's why I think those are so important, because it goes a step further, that this isn't just people trying to, again, kind of ease this existential dread, but it's, if there is a God who really made himself known to humanity in a particular way at a particular time in history, well, then we have to respond to that. And so I think that's a really important part of the question as well. Is that it's not just us looking and saying, well, how can we make ourselves feel better? But it's us saying, well, if these events are true, what does it mean for the way we view the world? And if it's true that there is a God who is transcendent outside of the world, but who made himself immanent, who became part of his own creation and then died at their own hands and then raised from the dead and then ascended into heaven and then sent his spirit that we could be empowered to live the way that he's called us to, well, then yes, that does give me hope, and that does give me a certain level of peace. It also gives me a certain level of fear, because I'm going to be held accountable by this God. But what it is the source for all of those things. It isn't in what it makes me feel, but it's in something that happened outside of me. And now I have to decide, what am I going to do about it? And ultimately, that's what we all have to figure out as people is if this thing is true, how do I respond to it then? And that's ultimately what it boils down for us. But I want to hear from you. What do you think about that question? What do you think about Alex O'Connor's question? How would you respond to it? Or, if you watched the video with Stuart and Cliffe, which I'm going to put the link in that below as well, go check it out. What do you think about their response to it? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. And again, if you like videos like this, go ahead and click subscribe. Would love to have you following along. And thanks for watching. We will see you next time.